Welcome back to another episode of the Musketeer Madness podcast. It comes at a time where the outlook is starting to look more positive for the Musketeers. Two of three big wins for Xavier, and four of their last five wins over DePaul, Villanova, Marquette, and then the big one at home against UConn, who's still in the top 25. There were 19 when Xavier beat them, 25 in the country right now. A lot of controversy about that. But we have a special guest today alongside Ben Haller and John Baldridge, as always. But Paul Fritschner, the host of the Sen Miller Podcast and pretty much do-it-all guy for Xavier Athletics, has joined the podcast. So, Paul, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it, fellas. Ben, John, good to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Paul, we'll get into it here shortly, but just kind of talk about, Ben mentioned your background doing the work for 1831 Media and then doing the work, not just, being with the men's team, but also a lot of work with women's basketball, baseball, soccer, volleyball here at Xavier as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I started doing it as a student, and I've been really fortunate to be able to continue it here after my time as a student. I graduated in 2019, and it's been a lot of fun. Look, to be around the program, to learn more about the sport and how the sport works, to be able to cover it, not just, from Xavier's level. I've been fortunate enough to go out and call some other games, over the past few years to outside of the Xavier sphere and do more with the Big East and just college basketball in general. But being so intimately familiar with the team and how a college basketball team at this level operates, it's taught me a lot. And Xavier's been a very valuable resource for me in all of that. And it's been fun to be able to do shows like this and just talk ball, right? I mean, this is why we do it. This is why we get into the business. So this is a lot of fun. And I look forward to doing more of this here in the future.
Yeah, we call you a guest on this podcast. I don't know how much of a guest you really are because you work for Field of 68 as well. You did some play-by-play for them down. And was it Charleston, the tournament you did?
Yeah, it was the Field of 68 tip-off event down in Charleston, Liberty, Florida Atlantic, and then, of course, College of Charleston, former head coach for Xavier, Chris Mack down there. Great to catch up with him. But, yeah, very fun event and doing more with Field of 68's bracketology here through the month of February as well. I won't be on every show, a handful of shows here and there that they've asked me to help with. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Xavier fans want you to be on the show because I do remember the first episode of Fielding the 68. You made sure to ask about Xavier, and I know a lot of Xavier fans are curious
Absolutely.
about that right now and their position. But outside of everything you do with Field of 68, John mentioned the 1831 Media. Obviously, that kind of got a lot of that kickstarted that was the Sen Miller Podcast. So you and Adam started it alongside Sen Miller. Really, I'm not sure if it is the first of its kind, but one of the first of its kind, just where a head coach of a power conference men's basketball team has a podcast like that, has a voice like that. I guess just start by how did you get started with that? Whose idea was it at first, and then how did you and Adam get involved?
Yeah, so Anthony Breen is a 2014 graduate of Xavier, and he was kind of the brainchild of all of this. And his idea behind a lot of it was Adam Baum, Paul Fritschner, and Sen Miller have three of the biggest followings in the Xavier community. How do we combine that together into a product that people will enjoy, listen to, watch, read, whatever it was? I mean, at the time, Adam was writing, and then he got out of writing and went into the private sector, into actually working for Anthony's corporate business. And at that point, I was approached in the late summer. I think it was probably early August of 2023 with the idea to co-host alongside Adam and Sean, the Sen Miller Podcast, which of course I was thrilled with the opportunity to do. And I think to your point, Ben, there are coaches who do, well, I don't want to say there are coaches. Almost every coach in the country has a weekly radio show or some sort of radio show where they recap games, they talk about their team, and it's their opportunity to really publicize and let the public know where the team is at that point in the season. But I don't know of any other coach that has a show as consistently as what we do. I mean, coaches have shows. John Calipari had a show that only ran for a few episodes. There are shows here and there. But I don't know of any other show that as consistently as what we do puts out weekly shows. Now, there hasn't been a weekly show in the last month or so as the season's gotten pretty busy, but we went about 58 straight weeks with the show to start off the run of the show. And I think the biggest thing for us is we don't really talk X's and O's on the Sen Miller podcast as far as what the team is doing at that current point. Because Sean's still doing the coach's show every Monday night. Mm-hmm. And that's where he really emphasizes what's happening currently with the team. We allow Sean the opportunity to bring on other coaching guests, former players, people that he knows around the college basketball world, to rehash stories, to talk about coaching ideas, talk about strategies, talk about really anything that he wants to get into. And that's why I think it's had so much success, is because it reaches a much broader audience. You don't have to be a Xavier fan to be able to sit there and enjoy listening to the Sen Miller podcast.
Oh, we'll talk about, the Xavier team winning their last 4 or 5 and their defense being one of the best in the country here in a moment. But, I remember a couple years ago, you talked to me, you were leaving Chatterbox Sports after your one of the shows that late that night, and you talked about growing your network at Xavier. You just mentioned that. It was a day-to-day process for you, getting out of college, doing all the different Xavier sports around here. But it always seems like you've had a rich love for Xavier basketball and the sport of basketball. And, kind of where did that start for you, and how did you get so involved at Xavier?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm not a Cincinnati guy. I'm born and raised Northern Virginia, right outside of DC. I lived there my whole life before I came to Xavier as a freshman. But my family is from Cincinnati, so I grew up going to games. I was very familiar with Xavier in the Cintas Center. Sean round 1, then Chris Mack, then now here Sean round 2, and all of that together. I mean, I went to small schools growing up, so kind of that small school atmosphere of Xavier was very appealing to me. I thought that was something that would help benefit me, not just in my career, but as a student as well, being able to have the smaller class sizes, all of those things. And it did. It was an immense help for me in all of that. Yeah. But alongside of it, I knew that I could work in an athletic department that promoted a high major college basketball team, a team that consistently succeeds at the highest level. And that was something that I knew if I could get in there right away and have success, then my career would be set up and I would be in a very good spot. And sure enough, I mean, I started, like I've said before, a couple of weeks into my freshman year, I was right away trying to do as much as I could with the athletic department. And I think for anybody listening to this that maybe is considering working in the athletic department or, considering a career in sports, working in the college athletic department is a huge deal for that. I mean, it's something that, a lot of employers afterwards will look for. So I really took that upon myself to do that. And now here it's paid dividends. I took the opportunity to meet a lot of the Fox Sports broadcasters that came in and called games, made a lot of great connections there. And, it's whether they've paid off in actual jobs or just relationships that I enjoy talking basketball with some of these guys, it's a lot of fun.
Well, obviously you've done, like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, just about everything it felt like for Xavier, but with 1831 Media now, one of your, arguably you guys' biggest project was announced earlier this October when you guys were going to start producing the All-In docuseries following this Xavier men's basketball season. Episode 5 of that comes out tonight, I believe. This will go out tomorrow, so it came out last night. Yep. What's that been like? I mean, how did that start, and how fun has been producing that? Has there been any challenges with that as well?
Definitely a lot of challenges, especially with how the season has gone to this point. I don't think we expected the amount of losses that kind of piled up there in the month of December. But what it's done is it's allowed us to tell the story of the season, and hopefully here down the stretch gives us an opportunity to share this redemption arc of this team and the fact that they were right there on the cusp of so many of their games. 5 of their 8 losses this year have come by a combined 20 points, and one of those other 3 was an overtime loss the other day to St. John's. So really, when you boil it down, this is a very good team that's been on the wrong end of a bunch of games this season. And our video editor, producer, everything extraordinaire, Josh Semsrott, has been the man behind all of this, really. He's been day, night, everything in the lab, creating this show, and he has created a masterpiece here as we get into episode 5. His focus has been telling different stories in each episode, and what you'll see here tonight, or what you've already watched in episode 5. If you've watched it already, it's out on YouTube by the time you've listened to this, is that Xavier has the longest streak in the country of consecutive seniors that have finished their career at Xavier and have gone on to graduate. Now, they've had players leave early to go play professionally, but players that have finished their career at Xavier, every single one of those players has graduated since 1985, and allowing us the opportunity to tell more of that story as well as what happens on the court. That's what you'll see here in episode 5. And again, it's just different angles of this team and what you're learning about behind the scenes of how this season has gone and the fact that it hasn't been perfect. I think after watching that Dayton exhibition in October, you're thinking to yourself, man, this is a team that, I would say a second weekend is an expectation of this team. And, they lose Lucina Traore to injury. That was before the Dayton exhibition, but still, you don't have the entire complement of your roster. Zach Fremantle goes out for 2 of the biggest games of your season against UConn and Marquette back in December. And now all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, okay, where do we go from here? What do we make of this? And that's what we've tried to do in the All In docuseries. Adam Baum, Josh Semstrat, those 2 guys have been really, really phenomenal with all of the stuff that they have been able to do to put into this show and to make this project as special as it has been so far.
Solo ball, he has the 2 misses. He misses a shot, and he gets the on rebound, and then they are able to get the shot clock violation. Just mention the defense, and it feels like that Xavier defense is one of the best in the country right now. And its last couple of years, it's been the Quincy Oliveri show with Desmond Claude, and then 2 years ago, it's a three-point team Xavier has. They get to the Sweet 16, and it's always been a Sen Miller-led team by defense. But the last couple of years, they got away from that. It's been the offense. How happy have you been as a Xavier fan, but also a person who covers this team, just see the growth of this defense recently, winning their last 4 or 5?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because if you think back to some Xavier teams here in recent years, their calling card hasn't been the defense. And to be able to have the confidence now in essentially 4 consecutive games against Villanova, against St. John's, I know they didn't win that game. Yeah. But against Marquette, against St. John's, and then against UConn, when you needed stops down the stretch, you got the stops that you needed. And that's what you were thinking there on Saturday night against UConn, was how different of a feeling you had in the last 20 seconds of that game, or at least that I had in the last 20 seconds of that game, as opposed to what we watched in December, where Xavier was up by 6 against TCU, couldn't close it out. Up by 7 against UC, couldn't close it out. Up by 1 against Marquette, couldn't get the stops. In overtime against UConn, couldn't win the game, had a lead late. If you flip 1 or 2 of those results, you're talking about seeding in the NCAA tournament. You're not talking about can this team make it to Dayton or not. And that's where I think the value of this team's defensive ability. I mean, you think back of the last 5 games, Xavier's the 3rd best defensive team in the entire country, not just the Big East, in the entire country. Since January 10th. Xavier's the 3rd best defensive team in the nation. And that speaks to what this team has been able to do. It speaks to what they did after that St. John's game at home. And that was a very low point of the season. Anybody around the team would tell you that. What did they do? What was their response? The team, they challenged each other. They said, we need to turn things around. We need to be gritty. We need to be tough. We need to get rebounds. We need to defend. That's what they've done.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty good point, John, just about how, it just feels like a different style team in the past, just in terms of the defense. And I think it's refreshing for Xavier fans, especially too. Just it could be exciting watching this team play defense. I mean, they get so many steals. Davion McKnight, Marcus Foster are just so active defensively, and I think that's a big reason they're turning their season around. Obviously, at this point. But Paul, being someone who obviously is so close to the team and has all this kind of access. So you talked about how unexpected all the losses were early in the season, and they went on that 3-game losing streak when they lost 4 or 5. Through your eyes, did anything surprise you about how the players reacted, or how Sean reacted, and how they handled the whole situation?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a point after that Marquette loss at home where it's a sour taste in your mouth going into the Christmas break. And you're thinking to yourself, all right, you have 10 days off here. And you're at a really serious point of this season where things have not gone well in December. You just lost on a controversial call at the end of the game where, Ryan Conwell would have still had to hit 2 free throws to tie the game and force overtime, but you felt pretty good about your chances given the run that you had just gone on to be able to win that game in the extra 5 minutes. There was some soul searching to do, both within the team, really within everybody. And what could this team do going forward to turn things around? Well, you get Seton Hall right after Christmas break. Then things, again, don't really go your way. You lose at Georgetown, a game that really anybody would tell you that they should have won that game. Mm-hmm. Lose at Georgetown, you lose to St. John's, and now was the turning point. The day after the St. John's game, the players got together and they said, what do we need to do to fix this? And to me, depending on how the rest of the season plays out, if they win tonight at Creighton, then all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, everything's in front of them. And you can point directly back to St. John's at the Cintas Center as the exact moment when things turned around. When they were at their lowest, they didn't cave in because that would have been very easy to do. And DePaul at that point hadn't won a Big East game yet. It would have been very easy for Xavier to lose, get just embarrassed at home against St. John's, go up to DePaul, lose. They snap their losing streak in Big East play. And from there, the season's really just a formality down the stretch. Maybe you can win the Big East tournament and that's it. But they didn't. To their credit, they turned things around. They've been playing their best basketball here lately. The offense has to maybe pick it up a notch going forward, but the defense has been more than good enough to win them games.
Yeah, you mentioned the defense, go back to St. John's. They're able to, take it to overtime, even though they were up big in that ball game, but they're able to get that stop at the end. They've been able to get stops against Marquette, against UConn, and they get a quad one win in that game. And now you look at this quad one schedule coming up. They only got 2 quad one games left against UMass Creighton tonight, and then you also have Villanova down the road, which you're not sure if they're going to be a quad one team or not. But what does Xavier need to do right? What's that number? Do you have a number that Xavier needs to get to win-wise to be able to be, right where you want to be at the end of the year?
Yeah, you have to hit the 20-win mark. There's no doubt about that. You have to hit the 20-win mark, and really you don't want to let anybody tell you differently because at the end of the day, the selection committee is human, and you really want to get to that 20-win mark because anything less than that, if Xavier wasn't, forget the optics of 20 wins and just having the 2 there. It's the fact that if you don't get to 20 wins, it means that you've lost a game that you shouldn't have lost down the stretch. And Xavier just can't afford to do that. They can't afford to lose to, they have to win out at home. And they can't really afford to lose to anybody besides Creighton on the road. And even the Creighton game, if you look at it, Xavier has, I think if they win the game, it's above a 50% chance to make the tournament. And if they lose the game, it's around a 14% chance to make the tournament. Now, there's a lot of other factors in there. They could run the table, go 9-0 down the stretch and win a game in the Big East tournament. And you're in the that gets you in. So the percentages, I'm not looking at that too much here at the end of January just yet, but it does give you a perspective as to how important this game is against Creighton. For me, I look at the fact that you only have 2 quad one games left. You have Creighton, you have Villanova. Creighton presents not a great matchup for Xavier. Creighton's been playing very well lately, but what Creighton does well is what Xavier doesn't do well, and that is their play around the basket. Ryan Kalkbrenner has blocked 56 shots himself this season. Xavier as a team has blocked 62. Yeah. Xavier has the 10th worst block percentage on their own shot attempts in the entire country, meaning only 10 teams nationally get their shots blocked at a higher percentage than Xavier's. And so what that tells me is, can you go out there tomorrow or tonight as you're listening to this, can you go out there tonight and win a game as a slight road underdog and in an environment where you haven't had a ton of success lately. They've only won one time in Omaha since Trayvon Blewett was on the team, and that was a major comeback a couple of years ago with Jack Nungy. Mm-hmm. Can Xavier go out there and win this game and really set the stage for the rest of this season? If they do that, the whole season is in front of you if you win this game tonight at Creighton, and I think the players know that. The coaching staff certainly knows that. They know that this game means a lot for how the rest of this season goes.
All right. We've set the table. Obviously it feels like it's just as much, like you just said, about finding quad one wins as it is about, total wins. And right now, I think, you have 10 games left in the season. I think if you're a Xavier fan, you're more concerned about the quad one part than the total wins part.
Oh, yeah.
We were talking about it after the UConn game on Saturday in the press room. Would be really nice if once Liam McNeely gets back, UConn can start playing some good basketball and find their way to the top 30. But those are just some things that are out of Xavier's control. But you brought up exactly what I was going to talk about, just the matchup issues it feels like that UConn presents. Brenner being, 2 or 3 time Big East Defender of the Year.
3 straight.
3 straight at this point, which I think he's one away from tying that record. But it feels like a game where you need Zach Freemantle to knock down a couple threes to draw him out of the paint a little bit. And you also need, it feels like with Xavier, a lot of their guards are not the biggest guards in the league. So it feels like this is a game where Dalen Swain has to play well.
Dalen Swain scored in double figures in 7 of his last 9 games. His defensive work has been outstanding. And yeah, you mentioned the matchup problem a little bit where Xavier needs to be able to step out and guard the perimeter. Creighton, almost 50% of their shot attempts are threes. That's one of the highest rates in the country. Mm-hmm. So can Xavier step out, hit shots, or defend the three at the rate that they need to be able to win a game like this? And then can they get the play, out of Dalen Swain that they've gotten lately? He has completely transformed himself in the last 5 games into a player that Xavier can not only count on, but really depend on. And to be clear, I mean, Dalen was not at 100% in that game against UConn, and you wouldn't have known it with how well he played. He scored 15 points, tied for the team lead. He was outstanding against UConn, and they are going to need him to continue elevating his game and playing at that level here down the stretch.
Yeah, there were 15 NBA scouts there, and Swain, it feels like he's just getting better, and he's reaching where he wants to be. But he can hit that pinnacle, and he hasn't, I think, got there yet. I think he's got more room to improve, and we got to get you out of here. But I want to ask you one question. I know you follow this Cincinnati area docket of basketball very well, and also just the local teams. And I grew up down in Louisville. They've won 9 straight under PK. What do you think about Pat Kelsey, a Xavier guy, to be able to go in there, a program that's been struggling, and really turn it around?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Louisville basketball hasn't been relevant for the last 2 years, and what they've been able to do here lately has been absolutely outstanding. They're getting good shooting. Their offense has been spectacular, but even more so than that, I mean, they've dealt with some injuries to a couple of key guys. You see Case and Pryor. I mean, they haven't been fully themselves, but yet they haven't lost since December 14th, John. They haven't lost in over a month, about a month and a half now at this point. They're coming off a 25-point win last week against SMU. This is a team that is playing for seeding in the NCAA tournament. Pat Kelsey's completely turned it around, and going forward, I'm very interested to see what Kelsey does at Louisville here in the next couple of years.
Yeah, a lot of Cincinnati area teams on the bubble. Louisville, if you go down just a little bit south, playing themselves out of that bubble conversation in a positive way. They've had a great season. Before we let you go, Paul, John and I do this as we are about every episode. Let's get a score prediction for that Creighton game tonight.
Score prediction for the Creighton game. I do think Xavier gets this game. Now, I predicted Xavier would beat UConn 77-70, and Dalen Swain would have 18 points. It was 76-72, and he finished with 15. So I'm warm right now.
Yeah.
So I'll try and run it back here. I'm going to say that Xavier wins this game against Creighton. I'm going to go a pretty similar score. I'm going to say 76-70 in this game tonight at Creighton.
It's the Xavier team averaging 77 per game right now, and Creighton's averaging 72. And both his teams score the basketball very well. I think it comes down to having that second piece outside Fremantle. Swain's been the guy this year. Xavier's going to get a victory. If they want to get a victory, they're going to score a high clip, and I do think they will. I'll go 75-71.
I guess I'll have to play devil's advocate a little bit. Can't sweep for Xavier here. Obviously, Creighton's playing. It feels like Xavier, Creighton are the two hottest teams in the Big East outside of St. John's. And like you said, Paul, they just shoot the three ball really well. This is not only a big game for Xavier, but it's a big game for them too. I think it'll be a high scoring one. I think Xavier will shoot the ball pretty well tomorrow too. But I'm gonna go 81-77 Creighton.
Okay. All right, fellas. I got to run, but I appreciate you guys having me on today. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for listening.